My name is Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden. Conjure by it at your own risk. I'm a wizard. I work out of an office in Midtown Chicago, and as far as I know, I'm the only openly practicing professional wizard in the country. You can find me in the yellow pages under wizards. Believe it or not, I'm the only one there. My ad looks like this: Harry Dresden, wizard. Lost items found, paranormal investigations, consulting, advice, reasonable rates, no love potions, endless purses, parties, or other entertainment. You'd be surprised how many people call just to ask if I'm serious.
Hey friends! So I recently finished the 4th book in the Dresden Files series, Summer Night, and I wanted to look back on all of them. I haven't done reviews for them yet, and just go through the first 4 books because I know there are a lot of questions about when does the series pick up, because there is a bit of a shift from this sort of serial mystery story that the Dresden Files starts out with, and when it continues into this larger, overarching, bigger world that Jim Butcher has created. I've heard a lot of people say, this is where it picks up, or it's not worth doing it because it takes way too long to get into the series. And I just wanted to make a video kind of dispelling some of those myths, at least in my opinion, to just bring across why I think the Dresden Files is worth it to read. I'm going to go over the first 4 books just quickly. We have Stormfront, Full Moon, Grave Peril, and Summer Night. And I enjoyed 3 of the 4 of them. If you've seen any of my previous videos, you will know that I was not a big fan of Full Moon, which for a long time I thought was Full Moon, and I think a lot of other people did too, but no, it's Full Moon. It's a little bit of a bump in the road, but really, the books aren't terribly long. And in my opinion, I do think that the payoff of this series is greater than the pain of having to make it through that one book. There are some fun characters and things that you get out of it that you do need when you're moving forward in the series. So, Stormfront, book number 1, we first get introduced to Harry Dresden and his world where he's working with the Chicago police. Specifically, her name is Murphy, and she's the leader of their, special task division. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But they basically deal with all of the crimes that no one really has any clue as to why they were happening. Anything really that's weird that happens. And so Murphy and Dresden have this really strange relationship where he gets called in to help sometimes on cases, but she really doesn't trust him. And so the first one, when you meet Dresden, everything, the kind of serial mystery that's going on is that there's been some deaths, and Dresden thinks that there's a sorcerer behind it. And so he is off to figure out who's casting these spells and who's murdering these people, because it takes a lot of power to do that. I thought that the first book was a really solid entry into a series. It was fun. It was kind of like watching an episode of a police procedural or something. It went by really quickly. I think I read it in a day and a half or something. And I found it really enjoyable. It was well-paced, and I thought you got a good look into Dresden as a character, and you met a couple of side characters, but not a ton, just mostly the police force. And then 1 or 2 of the mythical creatures that end up popping back in and out of all the stories, and that's really fun. You get to meet some fairies, which I really love the fairies. They're really funny in the first book. So Stormfront was really good. I think that it wasn't the best thing ever in the world, but it was a really solid entry, and I was glad that I read it. It hooked me enough to make me want to continue. Full Moon, however, I feel kind of tanked a little bit. It, from the name, Full Moon, and there's a wolf on the cover, obviously this one has to do with werewolves. And it gets a little complicated, this book. There ends up being 4 different types of werewolves, and we're trying to figure out who's a werewolf and who is not, and who's killing these people, and what's going on. And it involves the police again, but there's a couple layers to this particular story. And it's another one of the more procedural books. But in my opinion, Jim Butcher put a little too much into the story. Like, there were too many plot threads that I didn't feel like he gave enough time to wrap up in a proper manner. And with the multiple types of werewolves and all of the random characters that didn't seem to kind of fit in the story, it just felt really jumbled and really cluttered, and I just did not like it. And I rarely actively dislike books, and this was one of those. One thing that I really loved about this story is that you meet one of the side characters, and his name is Billy, and it's Billy and this pack of his werewolf friends, and they call them Billy and the Alphas, which I think sounds like an 80s hair metal band, and I love them, and they do pop up later in the series, and so that's an important thing that you learn. You also learn a little bit more about Dresden's past and about, what happened to him when he was younger, because he is on the outs with the Wizards Council, the White Council they call him, and so he is like on the edge of always getting in trouble with the other wizards. And so you learn about that, and it kind of expands Dresden's world, and you learn about like his fairy godmother and just other things that are happening on in the magical world. On to the third one, Grave Peril. Grave Peril is my personal favorite out of the first four. I loved it. So the first book touched on wizards and sorcerers. The second one was werewolves. The third one is about ghosts and other like spirits. And you really finally get to go into the Never Never, which is the like magical world between worlds that exists. And you find out more about Dresden. It's when really like I personally feel like the world starts to open up in Grave Peril. I felt like the story was clear. I felt like it was heading in a direction right from the beginning. It was still a little on the serial side of things, but because it expands the world, it doesn't feel like you're watching like another episode of Law and Order with wizards or something. So I really enjoyed that. My other favorite thing about Grave Peril is you meet one of my favorite characters in the whole series, and his name is Michael, and I cannot tell you much more about him, except for he has a magical sword called Amarachius, and I love him. If I were to put him in a D&D class, he would be just like the lawful good paladin. He is great, he is fun, and I think Butcher really kind of breaks the mold. I think he makes this really good character, because paladin type people can be a little bit of a wet blanket sometimes, but the way he writes the conversations and the dynamic between Michael and Dresden, I feel like it's really great. I haven't even mentioned Bob yet or anything. There's so many fun side characters in this story. Bob would be the skull that lives in Dresden's basement, and it's inhabited by this spirit, and he's kind of like his own personal magical Google, and that's kind of fun. But when you're in Grave Peril, there's ghosts and spirits, and Murphy gets into some peril herself, and so there's more of an emotional risk involved in this story versus the other ones specifically for Dresden. And so you find more about him, you see him act outside of his just I'm a wizard detective person. Like he becomes more human, I guess, in this book. And I really loved it. I thought that the payoff at the end was really great. And I can't wait to read more of the series because Michael does not come back in Summer Night, and I can't wait to see him again. Moving on to Summer Night, which was also a really great entry into the series. This one, we take the part of the world that we explored in Grave Peril and we open it up even more. Like the whole Never Never and magical world just pretty much explodes in Summer Night, and you find out more about how all these different races of magical beings are connected. And Summer Night involves fairies. And I'm not talking like just like Tinkerbell fairies. I'm talking about like the Fae. We're talking like Akatar or the Cruel Prince, like the beautiful, chilling, mysterious, and lethal fairies. And also involves the White Council again. And there's vampires and things involved because the story really picks up from the end of Grave Peril and moves straight into Summer Night. Which is why I say, like, I think personally Grave Peril is where the series really starts to pick up, like the second half of that book. Because instead of feeling completely serial anymore, this is just a continuation from the story. You got to see different areas of the Never Never, you got to meet different fairy courts and stuff, and meet more wizards. I know it might seem like I'm telling you a lot about the stories itself, but it's really not a spoiler. Like, none of the things I've said are really spoilers. Just because Butcher has created this really robust world. And I really love that about the Dresden Files. And that's why I think so many people love it. I can definitely understand why there are people who don't, but I'll get to that in a little bit. If I'm going to rank the first 4 books, I would probably put the third one as my top favorite. So Grave Peril, then Summer Night, then Stormfront, and then Full Moon. I have been told by lots of people that Full Moon is the worst in the entire series. There's 14 books now. So if you can make it through Full Moon, I really think that you'll enjoy the series as a whole, especially if you really loved Stormfront. One of the things I like the most about the Dresden Files and Butcher's writing is that it's just really easy and simple to read. He doesn't have complicated prose. He doesn't over explain things. He doesn't write flowery like I feel Rothfuss does. It's very to the point, and one of the reasons behind that is because it's all in first person. You're in Dresden's head all the time, and he's snarky. He's so funny. He doesn't hold back punches. So if you're someone who, say, has read the first Law trilogy, you take the type of humor and the type of inner monologue that you get from like Galacta that I know a lot of people love. That's how I feel reading Dresden. And he's not evil. There's not significant torture. I would never ever call the Dresden Files grimdark ever. It's like, you know, the snarky bad boy guy from any of those like sci-fi shows. And it's so perfect if you like audiobooks, if you're someone who enjoys listening as opposed to reading paperback, which I am not, but I'm actually intrigued to listen to the audiobooks for this because the guy who does all of the audiobooks for the Dresden Files is the guy who plays Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, James Marsters. I can hear him in my head. I love Buffy. If you're a Buffy fan, you gotta give it a try. And I feel like he's the perfect person to voice Dresden because he sounds like that bad guy who's been around the block a couple times. And that's exactly how I imagine Dresden in my head. I love the Dresden Files because of the character of Harry Dresden. Like, this series wouldn't work if Jim Butcher didn't give him the voice that he was given. Dresden has been browbeaten. He has been stepped on. He's the bottom rung of the wizard totem pole, but he's hanging on and he's convicted. Like, he has his own personal moral code, and this moral code is the way and the reason he can do the magic he does. And he works so hard to stick to that. And as the series progresses, as you go from the first book into the fourth, you see him open up and you see the heart that he has. And he keeps it really hidden, like a little like inside an M&M. He has this like candy coating on top of him that he doesn't let anyone in. And as you get further along, you kind of peel away those layers and you get to see inside of Dresden. You get to see why he hurts so much and why he has a hard time trusting other people. And when he does start to trust and confide in others, it feels so gratifying. And just the dynamics between the characters that Butcher writes, it's just really sweet. I would not say that characterization in the Dresden Files is the best thing I've ever read. You want great characterization? Go read The Lone Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. But this, for what the Dresden Files is pretty great. The Dresden Files is not meant to be some big, deep series where you're thinking of all these significant philosophical thoughts. The Dresden Files is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be a ride. It's supposed to be this fantasy palate cleanser that just lets you have fun and immerses you in this fun urban fantasy world. And it hits all of the boxes for me for that, especially once you get into the third and fourth books. and I can't wait to continue on. Now I'm selling you on all this, but I do feel like I should say the things that I think people might not appreciate about the Dresden Files, because I know it's not going to be for everyone. There are people I know who don't like reading fluffy, fun books for the sake of being fun. There are people who don't think that that's a worthwhile use of your time. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that, reading can be educational and can also be fun and relaxing. But flaws for the Dresden Files, it can feel serial at some times, especially in the beginning. And I'm sure that, a lot of times the books start with, oh, here's this person coming to my office to get help. And the beginning starts off sort of the same, but then it expands almost immediately. Depending on how much absurd humor you like, you may or may not enjoy the jokes that are in these books. Sometimes Butcher really throws a low ball at you, and there's, I don't know, like a fart joke or something really ridiculously silly that just isn't mature at all. But that's part of Dresden's personality. He needs to make it weird sometimes. He can't be serious. Dresden doesn't really do serious very well. He likes to break the ice, and I personally think that's funny, but I know that there are a lot of people out there who might not. So sometimes the humor is very lowbrow. Sometimes the humor is pretty decent, especially when it comes from other characters other than Dresden. Sometimes the Dresden Files brings up concepts that it can't necessarily completely flesh out before the end of the book. They'll bring up some things and you're left wondering well, you kind of touched on that one thing, but I wish we'd explored that more. Like I said, I'm only on I just finished book 4. It might come up again later. He might expand even more after, the 5th or 6th book. I know that one of the books, the book changes, which I don't know which, I think it's 10 or 11, is a huge deal. Everyone says it's their favorite, that it destroys them emotionally. So I'm assuming that some of these big concepts that have been brought up will get touched on in that book, or at least by that time. The last thing that I would really say that some people might not like and might discourage them from, proceeding on with the Dresden Files would be that sometimes it can feel a little predictable, especially in the beginning with the serial, Dresden's gonna survive. Well, there's 14 books in the series. If he doesn't survive, what the hell's gonna happen? So, but with the cop procedural thing, there were a couple things where I was like, oh, well, I kind of figured that was how that was going to go, or that was what was going to happen. But I will say, after reading the 4th one, I did get some surprises that I wasn't necessarily anticipating. So I think that that's going to get better as he writes more too. And so, yeah, being a little predictable, the weird humor sometimes, and maybe just a little bit repetitive in the beginning of the stories, that might be a little bit of a turnoff for people. But other than that, I really think it's just a fun romp. And if you're looking for something fun that you enjoy reading, if you're tired of just continuing to read one long chonker of a fantasy book after another, and you just want something short and quick that will entertain you and kind of cleanse your palate in between these big fantasy series, I would highly suggest reading the Dresden Files. I really love them. I've been trying to read one a month for a while. I don't know if I'll get to one in June because of the readathon. I'm trying to read all of these other books, but I'm sure I'm going to get to one in July, definitely. And so I hope that I answered a little bit of that, question, when does the Dresden Files get good? End of book 3, beginning of book 4, that's when I say it starts moving forward, the world expands, Dresden gets more fleshed out, and I think that's when Jim Butcher really hits his stride as a writer. So if you have not checked out Dresden Files yet, next time you need a little bit of a break, check out Stormfront. It's so good. I think that you will enjoy it, and if you decide it's not your cup of tea, it's 300 pages, so you didn't waste too much time. Please comment, and subscribe. I'd be very appreciative, and I hope you guys have a wonderful night. I'll see you later.